All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. You don't really have the feedback of being in front of people, so I'm just going to assume that you're all there, hopefully at home, having a really nice day with some good air conditioning, especially if you're in Montreal. My name is Jeffrey Dungen. I'm co-founder and CEO of Really Active, and this is Campus Party Digital Edition Canada, the largest innovators event in the world, and I'm excited to present Engineering Efficient Humanity. So let's get into what that means. I'm going to start our story in Montreal, which is my native city. I'm hoping that people from around the world are joining this and some Montrealers. If you're from Montreal, you'll probably recognize this image. This is the biosphere, which is a giant geodesic dome in Montreal, one of the architectural landmarks that we're known for. And the reason why I present this dome, this Montreal landmark, is because it was created by someone named Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller is a designer. He's an architect. He's many things. He was, I think, the second leader of Mensa. Brilliant, brilliant man. And Bucky, he wrote a book called Critical Path around 1980. I think it was published in 82 or 83, which coincidentally is the year that I was born. And when I read this book, it's a very interesting one. Highly recommend. It's a bit of a read, but interesting to go into the past and look at a futurist book. In this book, at one point, he starts telling a story. And the story talks about is how he missed a flight. So depending on how old you are, maybe you can go far enough into the past of what it was like to fly in the 70s and 80s. But at that time, everything was done with paper. Agents had to look in really old computers and stuff to figure out what was going on. And Bucky in his book talks about how he could have made a connection, made a flight to get to some important presentation. He laments that this didn't happen. And he says, well, if only computers had the information about where all the planes were, how many people were there, what's going on, and a computer rather than the human had made the decision, well, I would have made my flight. I would have made it to that conference. And after he goes through this story, he gives a name to this. And what he calls this is the computer accounting switchover. I would imagine that in the audience, and I hope there's lots of you, you've probably never heard of this term, the computer accounting switchover. But in Bucky's mind, this meant that computers will take over understanding how things work. There's a switch over so that humanity is better. It's advanced. Now, when I read computer accounting switchover and what he described it as, I said, wow, this sounds really familiar based on some other term that's going on current in the world right now, which is the Internet of Things. So if you put the two definitions side by side, you have Buckminster Fuller on the left, and he talks about the computer accounting switchover being about giving computers relevant information so they can make better answers based on the consequences and the context of a situation. On the other side, you have Kevin Ashton, who coined the phrase Internet of Things around 99, 2000. And he explained the definition of IoT as empowering computers so that they have their own way of gathering information so they can observe, identify, understand the world, without the limitations of human-entered data, which kind of goes back to Fuller's story. Now, what's interesting here, if you look at the timeline, you have in 1980, you have Fuller talking about the computer accounting switchover. Curiosity, that's the year I'm born. 2000, you have Kevin Ashton, who comes up with the Internet of Things, which if you were alive in 2000, then let's say in the professional world, you can think back to what computers were like there. So trying to preach Internet of Things in 2000, that's pretty forward thinking. The year 2000, coincidentally, that's the year my engineering career began. And we're in 2020 now. We're 20 years ahead of all of that. I'm presenting at Campus Party. So you may be asking, what are we going to be talking about in 2020? What is that name? Or who? What is the face that's supposed to be there? But I'll argue that those are probably not the questions we should be answering the most urgently. The question we should be answering the most urgently is why? Why do we care about computer accounting switchovers? Why do we care about the Internet of Things? Why do we care about computers knowing what's going on in the real world? Well, this picture here from NASA, this is a bigger sphere than the biosphere that I showed earlier from Fuller. It's the sphere that we live on, the Earth, and it has a finite amount of resources. And there's an increasing number of people who like a higher and higher quality of life. And at a certain point, some would argue it's past, some will argue it's in the near future, but we will meet a point where there's not enough resources to live sustainably here. So the why are we talking about this is, for me, essentially because we have to solve this problem, which is more and more urgent. And if we look back on this talk from the future, which hopefully will be long and prosperous, I think we'll think that 2020 was a pretty particular year. So it's a good time to be talking about this. There's two options that we have to live sustainably on the planet at this stage. One is that we make sacrifices. We say, we're beyond our means, we have to cut back. Or option two, which is probably more palatable to most people, is we have to create efficiencies. That means that the things we already do or the things that we want to do, we need to do them more efficiently so we don't outstrip the resources that are available to us here. So let's give some examples. That was fun. Let's do 3. Food, mobility, clothes. Everyone here, I'm sure, eats. Everyone here, I'm sure, moves around, although perhaps less in 2020, depending on where you are in lockdown. And everyone here wears clothes, unless, of course, you're watching this from the comfort of your home, and then I won't ask if you're wearing pants or not. But let's think about this in terms of sacrifices or efficiencies. I don't think anyone would argue that we're quite inefficient at getting all the food that's grown and raised into mouths and being used. There's actually a lot of inefficiency and waste in food, so there's a lot we could do better there. Think about mobility. Last vehicle you were in. Were there empty seats? Where was it going somewhere for no reason? Lots and lots of inefficiencies there. And if you think of clothes, you think of fast fashion, you think of how many clothes you have in your closet right now and how many you can actually wear. We're quite inefficient on clothes. There's a lot of room that we could improve there on those 3 categories. So if we wanted to improve on all of those, on how food gets to the right place, on how we use mobility more efficiently and all that, what we really need to do is have computers find a way to know who or what is where and how in real time in a way that they can understand. And if they understand that, if they know, which mouth is hungry, where is the food, where is the bus, what clothes are available, whatever, well, then you can start to actually make better decisions like Fuller talked about and like Kevin Ashton talked about. So the reason why I'm very excited about how, in terms of timing today, that we can actually really do something with this, may not be obvious to you, but I think everyone here has a smartphone. Think of how many smartphones there are in the world today. Each one of these smartphones has a little Bluetooth radio in it. And these little Bluetooth radios, they send out little ambient messages that can be picked up that have identifiers and things in them. So the way we can look at the world today, you have about 4 billion, even more than that, Bluetooth devices shipping every year. And these represent, in a way, usually who is usually carried by people, often these Bluetooth things. On the other side, on RFID, and this is more what Kevin Ashton was talking about, you have about 15 billion of these little RFID tags that are shipping every year. And they're all standardized. They've been agreed upon by big companies like Google and some of the other giants in the space. If you bought high-end clothing recently, you may have looked at the tag and seen a little symbol in there that's RFID. These can actually be picked up at about a 10-meter range, but using big sort of industrial antennas. But based on the fact that there's so much identifiable stuff, you can actually have computers just listen for all that stuff and start to get an idea of, again, who, what, is where, and how. Now, if I present this, most people go, sure, but this doesn't really speak to me. So we tried to do something to make this more accessible to people. So a few years ago, I collaborated with Dungen, who's my neighbor here in the office. This is our office here, the conference room. Kind of boring, but and we created something where we said, how can we make people experience and feel just how much ambient wireless traffic there's out there? How many things are machine readable, machine discoverable? So we created something with a Raspberry Pi, a little cheap computer. You can see in the photo, she's wearing a subwoofer backpack, really cool stuff from Subpack. Got some headphones on. We wrote some code. This is what my company Really Active does. We reappropriate some of the code, and we made it so that whenever packets would come in, they'd be transformed into kind of ambient sounds that you could just kind of listen to. And in this shot, Evelyn's walking around New York City, and she's having a great time because there's all these sounds and feelings that are coming in. And really, as people walk by, you hear them or you feel them if it's in your subwoofer, or someone opens a door and you feel the traffic of packets coming out. Really, really interesting. So part of what I've done is trying to make this more accessible so people can understand that around us, there's all this information that we could use to help computers understand our world. Now, we're probably at the point in the talk where if you haven't asked it already, oh, and by the way, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat at any time so you don't forget, and we'll go on those after. I'll leave lots of time for that. We're probably at the point now where you're saying, wait a minute, Jeff, what data is actually being shared? What's coming off of my phone? Is the shirt that I'm wearing or the pants that I'm not wearing, are they identifiable in my home? And who owns this data? Because of course we've gone through all the Google, Facebook, Amazon, scandals and notions of recent times where there's this question about, wait, do we own our own data? Who does? But again, in asking the right questions, I think the right question to ask here and now is who can access the data? The more important part here is actually access. So let's take this back to food, mobility, and clothes. So, who owns the food or whatever, but think about it more this way. Who should be able to access the information about what is in your fridge? So imagine if you wanted food to not go bad, you want it to be used efficiently. Well, maybe people nearby, right, who are looking for something you have in your fridge that you're not going to consume, if they had access to that information, that could actually save waste. Taking it a step further, if we really had that in place, would you even need to own a fridge? Or would we have more communal fridges, the Uber of fridges or something like that? Take mobility. Who should have access to the information about where you are headed? Maybe today you punch that into Waze, you punch that into Google or something else. But what if the people around you in your immediate surroundings who are also moving to places, their computers were able to understand where you're going and vice versa, so that you could spontaneously create lifts, create interesting ways to maximize the efficiency of getting everyone to where they want to be. And that brings it back to the question of, do I even need to own a vehicle? Which I don't think is a very tricky question these days. 10 years ago, I don't think most people would say, no, vehicle ownership, I can get away with it. But today with Uber, they've shown us that, and other public transit, that you can do that. Apps and everything else, good information has made that possible. The one I always find really interesting, the what's in my closet. Think about your closet, how many articles you have in there, and how many of them you're wearing right now. What's that percentage? Is it 10% of the clothes that you're wearing right now? Maybe that's on a good end. Maybe it's just 1%. But think of all of those clothes just sitting there as unutilized resources that took energy, are taking up real estate and all that. There's a lot of inefficiency in clothes. So the question of, do I even need to own my clothing? And I posed this question about 5 years ago at another talk, and people were like all aghast. But I think we've started to see even clothing as a service, which is really interesting. So if we take all of this that I've presented, and we had to call it something, what I would call it today is the pervasive sharing economy. I'm sure you're familiar with sharing economy. You equate that with Airbnb, Uber, maybe some other services that are more progressive depending on where you live. In the term pervasive, I've taken this from what's called pervasive computing, which is another way of looking at computer counting switchover or IoT. It's the idea of computers being everywhere. So if you put the two together, you have really the ability to take the sharing economy down to micro levels and like real-time amazing things. What's interesting here, though, is from a technical adoption standpoint, because we all have the smartphones that are generating all these waves, there's infrastructure to pick this up. On the technological side, we've actually come so far now since Fuller and Kevin Ashton that I'm not worried about the tech anymore. That's there. We can do this today. That's less of an issue. But myself as an engineer, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how do we get cultural buy-in? How do we get people to give up ownership and think about access, not just like they did perhaps for Uber or for Airbnb, rethinking travel and mobility, but rethinking what's in your closet, how you consume food, how you go about your day. So that's the interesting thing. We've come quite far now. People are really the thing that I worry about. How are we going to get convince people to partake in this? So get ready. I'm going to have one slide with a graph now, and we're going to go through it quick just to give you an idea why I think this matters. This is my nerd slide, if the others weren't nerdy enough already. There's an author called Jeremy Rifkin. He's written some really interesting books. He's also got a really great Netflix special that I'd definitely check out if you have time as well, Jeremy Rifkin. And he talks about his metric being aggregate energy efficiency. In short, what this means is if you want to get a product or service to a user how much energy and resources goes to waste before that happens. So in the first industrial revolution, so we're talking about coal and trains and like telegraph and stuff, only 2.5% of the energy and resources actually went into the end product. All the rest is waste. Then around, turn of the 1900s, we have the next industrial revolution with now oil, and we have telephones, and we have like next generation stuff, even up to the internet of today. And according to Rifkin, that's actually peaked out at about 13% efficiency about 20 years ago. And it's kind of flatlined now. We talk about flattening the curve. They really flattened the curve there. That's where both Fuller and Kevin Ashton had their careers. Great ideas, but they're in a point where the world's not really moving forward. We're not really getting more efficient. Something's there blocking it. And what Rifkin's talking about is this third industrial revolution, or Industry 4.0, has lots of names. And his predictions are that it can get up to 40% aggregate efficiency. That's 3 times more efficient than what we're living today. Think of how few sacrifices we'd have to make if we could be 3 times more efficient. That's incredible. So the reason I bring this slide up is because if you look at it, we've all lived now, I don't think anyone's old enough. No, I don't think anyone's 120 years old on this talk. We've all lived in the second industrial revolution. 2020 feels like it could be the cusp of some kind of revolution. Things are going to go some way, hopefully up. And maybe we're living in that moment now. So maybe we talked about the you earlier. Maybe that's you that has a really big impact, that you're the next step on this, where you're thinking less about tech, but you're actually moving forward on, well, what is the experience? How do we get people to buy in and opt in? So thank you for being patient on this slide. Now what I'll do is I will do my own little speculation on what that future might look like, hopefully to spark some questions, some ideas, give a feeling. So here's my prediction. I know it's wrong. I just think it's probably less wrong than if I took something willy-nilly. So in the future, take it back to food, mobility, clothes. Easy examples we can all relate to. Imagine that you had your experience as a human in the world, your user interface, whatever it is, probably not a phone, but imagine you always had 3 choices. That a computer presents you with 3 choices. I don't know if it's beaming through your head or how, right? But there's 3 choices. The first choice is, do you want to choose the efficient solution? Do you want to do the best thing, to make what's best for the world that'll make us last the longest? Or do you want something comfortable? Or do you just want a surprise? Let's take a look for food. Food, the efficient option is, hey, here's the stuff around you that's going to go bad soon that needs to get consumed. This is the coolest recipe we can put together that you can eat. That's pretty neat. If that's your story of how you have your lunch, I think that's pretty cool. But then you have a comfort option. You go like, yeah, that's nice. I don't really want that. I want what I like. I want my poutine with smoked meat. I want my comfort food. I want my whatever, right? So you choose that option. And then there's surprise. And that's where I think I love this option. It's that what would surprise be for computers that know a lot about almost everything, and what can they do as a surprise? That's kind of the like, go for it, surprise me. And maybe you just get efficiency and comfort, but you'll probably get something else. Think about mobility. Mobility, the efficient one is, hey, you've got to get from point A to point B. A computer tells you, great, use this mode of transport. This will use the least energy in aggregate or something. There's the comfort way. Maybe you're flying halfway around the planet and you say, you know what? I want a sleeper bed. And then there's surprise. And I think in terms of mobility, you can probably imagine some pretty interesting surprises of how you could get from point A to point B that are outside of what you're used to. Hop on this electric longboard with this person, then get into this van with someone else, and then, swim across or get into a canoe, whatever it is. There's some pretty neat things that could exist there. And then with clothing, this one I find fascinating because we all have clothes, right? What's the most efficient clothes to wear on a given day, right? Or in terms of the laundry cycle or how all that stuff works. There's comfort. Make me feel like what I want to feel like today. Let me wear what I want to wear. And then I think surprise for clothes is probably the most sort of fun and out there one. So that's my prediction for what a future could look like if we have a pervasive sharing economy and some kind of user interface, user experience that's there that still makes it fun to be a human. So to wrap up now, if you remember my title when I was starting, I talked about engineering efficient humanity. To wrap up, I've dropped the engineering. I'm an engineer. I love engineering. I'm going to engineer, I'm sure, all my life. But what I've realized is we've got to a point now where the engineering aspect is okay. We'll get through it. Now it's the efficiency and the humanity that are really essential for moving everything forward. And we all have to remember that it is about people, not just technology. It's people that are going to make this happen. It's people we have to convince to make this happen. And it's at the service of people that we're doing this so that it still feels greater and greater. And we have hopes and aspirations as humans moving forward to do great things rather than having to make sacrifices. So with that, I think that leaves probably about 8 minutes for questions. I hope I'm in kind of in my time. Thanks very much for listening. And I'm going to just figure out now the best way that I can see your questions. Okay, we have a first question. So it's about balancing privacy and efficiency to avoid a Big Brother society. So if you've seen movies, Minority Report, you've read 1984, there's an obvious, concern that we all have that if this were out in the wild and everywhere, well, why are the computers, not working in our favor? And do we still have privacy if computers can understand everything? And I think that's something we can definitely overcome here, where the most important thing, if you look at access and ownership, imagine your own data is your own, it's your property, and then you can choose how to monetize or use that, but you're in control of that aspect of your life. As long as that is preserved, everything I presented, I feel works out quite well. When you have an unequal balance, so some people have more access to information than others, that's generally where it doesn't work. And in all the startups I've worked at over the, past almost 2 decades now, that's always been my litmus test, is the moment there's a skew in information that someone gets more than they should, that's usually when I pull myself back out. Are there any other questions? There we go. Very interesting. So yeah, the sustainability impact. If everyone allowed access to their data, and here I'll specify again, I think it's access that they want to allow, whatever they're comfortable with allowing. The sustainability impact for me, as you saw, Rifkin predicts we can triple our efficiency. What that means is if we did that, and if we actually had a fairly or slightly more equal distribution of wealth and resources, or less artificial barriers to that, we could all completely raise our standard of living and still produce lots of babies and still move forward as a species for quite some time. I think, though, at the same point, there's a lot of damage that's been done in the world to right now. So there's some of it we probably have to repair as well. But to try to as succinctly as possible answer that question, I think this is probably one of our best opportunities to really make an impact, being able to live sustainably on the planet. It's through efficiencies. Oh, where do you think the pervasive sharing economy takes root? So it's interesting. So with the company that I started, Really Active, we've had a big vision. We've had lots of customers all across the board. We weren't sure what was going to start. Is it like advertising and marketing, like a Minority Report kind of thing? Does it go somewhere else? What's been interesting is in the past 2-3 years, we've really seen that the workplace is a great microcosm for this vision. If you think about it, when you go to work, or when you went to work, because maybe you're stuck at home and can't go to work right now, but when you go to work, you're in a space where usually the physical space belongs to the employer or the employees or some version thereof. But you are on a relationship level, who is who owns what, and you're working together on a specific project. So actually in the workplace, it's much easier to give up some information about yourself. If you want your coworkers to find you faster, to know that you reserved a conference room, all kinds of things, or what you're working on. And we've actually made really good progress there. So my bet today would be that in the workplace, and from workplace, it can be like traditional office. We've done stuff in hospitals where it's about wellness of the healthcare workers. We've done stuff even on military bases, which sounds maybe a little bit weird, but you have an incentive to share data there because it's part of a smaller microcosm. It's not getting touched by the typical social networks. Where the data is going, or at least you should if you're if in your workplace things are being taken care of well. From thereafter, if that works well, people will go out of work and go, why don't I have this in the subway car that I'm taking home now? Why don't I have this in my home? Why don't we use this towards something else? I think workplace would be an interesting one to bet on, but we will see. Oh, and if you're wondering, yeah, this thing that's blinking around my neck, this is a social distancing contact tracing device that we're testing. So we actually wear these around the office, and if it blinks red, it means I'm close to either another object or another person. And just outside this room, we're testing some stuff out. So there's radio everywhere. All right, I think that's probably all of the questions that we've had. So I think everyone then gets a well-deserved bio break probably before the next speaker. So from myself, thank you very much for tuning in and for watching. I hope that you are where you would want to be, that you are healthy, and that you're optimistic about the future, so we can all together reboot the world in the way that we want it to be rebooted. Thanks.